While impeachment inquiry hearings unfolded, President Trump slammed reports that he had a health scare over the weekend that prompted a visit to Walter Reed Medical Center.
One other thing, I thought I'd bring it up while we're here. I went for a physical on Saturday. My wife said, "Oh, darling, that's wonderful," because I had some extra time, because it looks like January could be a busy month if she's able to get the vote, which she should be able to.
Most dangerous convergence of medical and legal accountability in American presidential history is happening right now in real time. And the documented record from both tracks paints a picture far more consequential than either one alone can communicate. Donald Trump, a 78-year-old president with documented cardiovascular risk factors, chronic health conditions, and a daily medication regimen that contradicts his own doctor's recommendations, is simultaneously the first president in American history.
There's concern today for President Trump's health after a C-SPAN cameraman spotted a peculiar circle on his hand. He zoomed in to reveal a patch of makeup covering a bruise. The president appears to have used makeup like this. It's flesh-colored concealer used to hide marks or bruises. From a distance, it's hard to tell you're wearing it.
The medical track produces public scrutiny of a president's fitness for office, documenting the gap between categorical claims of perfect health and specific indicators that specialists identify as serious concerns. The legal track produces documented findings, convictions, contempt citations, and a judge's formal warning that financial sanctions have failed and jail is now being considered. Let me walk you through exactly what the documented record establishes.
Adding to the medical mystery, video of Trump from the weekend showed that his ankles appear swollen.
I know that many in the media have been speculating about bruising on the president's hand and also swelling in the president's legs.
Well, today, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt read out a letter from the White House physician.
In recent weeks, President Trump noted mild swelling in his lower legs.
Because the viral framing that presents Trump as being on the verge of an immediate dramatic collapse, combined with an imminent jail order, misses the more institutionally significant reality. What the record actually shows is a sitting president whose specific documented health indicators create a cardiovascular risk picture that outside specialists identify as warranting serious concern, combined with a standing felony conviction on the permanent record. A judge who has exhausted every financial deterrence mechanism and formally put incarceration on the table, and the documented convergence of both tracks at the intersection where any future serious sanction will land not on a fresh defendant, but on a repeat offender whose age and health profile will make every judicial decision more explosive. Start with the medical disclosures, because this is where the gap between public claims and documented reality is most stark. Trump self-disclosed to the Wall Street Journal that he takes 325 milligrams of daily aspirin.
Woman's highly overrated. Woman is highly incompetent. And if she's able to get the vote, so maybe she'll get it by using USMCA, but I went for a physical, and I came back. My wife said, "Darling, are you okay? What's wrong?" "Oh, they're reporting you may have had a heart attack." I said, "Why did I have a heart attack?" "Because you went to Walter Reed Medical Center. That's where we go when we get the physicals." I said, "I was only there for a very short period of time. I went, did a very routine, just a piece of it. The rest of it takes place in January."
That specific dosage matters because cardiology guidelines have moved away from recommending high-doses daily aspirin for older adults. The bleeding risk the dose creates in the elderly population now outweighs the cardiovascular prevention benefit in patients whose primary risk profile involves complications of excessive anticoagulation. A nearly 80-year-old person taking higher than recommended aspirin doses daily in the context of a documented cardiovascular risk profile serious enough to warrant advanced imaging is not a minor deviation from standard medical guidance. It is the specific combination of age-related bleeding vulnerability and excessive anticoagulation dosing that outside cardiologists identify as one of the most significant individual modifiable risk factors in Trump's overall profile. Trump's own explanation for the dose, that he likes his blood nice and thin, directly contradicts what his doctors reportedly advised. Doctors who recommend against a specific dose for a specific patient do so because their clinical assessment indicates the dose creates more risk than it prevents. The gap between the doctor's recommended against it guidance and the I do it anyway daily practice is the behavioral signal illustrating the broader credibility dynamic the health track is documenting. The advanced imaging order tells us even more. Trump was ordered to undergo cardiovascular imaging, which he initially characterized as an MRI before later admitting it was a CT scan. That communication inconsistency, mischaracterizing a clinical procedure, reflects the same credibility problem that the hollow and untrue and severely compromised credibility judicial findings established in the legal track. A person whose public communication about their own medical situation is inconsistent with documented clinical facts is a person whose credibility across domains is compromised.
Did a very routine physical, visited the family, visited a couple of groups, but visited the family of a young soldier who was very badly injured, who was in the operating room. I toured the hospital for a little while. I was out of there very quickly. I got back home. And I get greeted with the news that we understand you had a heart attack. I was called by our people in public relations. Sir, are you okay? I said, okay from what?
Trump's physician characterized the CT scan outcome as perfectly normal, but outside cardiologists apply more nuance to the same information. They note that a CT scan finding described as normal in a high-risk elderly patient establishes that specific concerning findings were absent on that specific scan on that specific day. It does not mean the patient's cardiovascular health is guaranteed or that the ongoing risk profile the imaging was ordered to evaluate has been resolved. The imaging was ordered because the physician identified a concern serious enough to warrant it. The normal result resolves the specific question the scan was designed to answer without resolving the broader cardiovascular risk profile that made the imaging clinically appropriate. Chronic venous insufficiency, minimal sleep, and public drowsiness are the systemic health indicators that establish the physiological stress load the cardiovascular risk factors are operating within. Chronic venous insufficiency involves reduced efficiency of blood return from the lower extremities, placing additional demand on the cardiovascular system. Minimal sleep is the lifestyle factor cardiologists and sleep specialists consistently identify as one of the most significant modifiable risk factors for cardiovascular events in elderly patients. Chronic sleep deprivation produces sustained elevation of stress hormones and inflammatory markers directly associated with cardiac and stroke risk. Occasional drowsiness at public events is the behavioral manifestation consistent with this physiological picture. Now layer in the legal track, Trump was convicted in New York on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in the hush money case. He received an unconditional discharge, no prison, no fine, no probation, making him the first president to take office with a felony record but without incarceration. The New York Court of Appeals and the United States Supreme Court both refused to block his sentencing. The Supreme Court specifically noted that the unconditional discharge imposed only a relatively insubstantial burden on the incoming president. That's the highest court in the country, formally characterizing the sentencing consequences of a 34-count felony conviction as relatively insubstantial, while simultaneously confirming the conviction itself is real on the permanent record and not going away. During the trial, Judge Juan Merchan found Trump in criminal contempt 10 times for violating a gag order, 10 separate findings, 10 documented violations after the court made clear the behavior was prohibited. Merchant warned an open court that jail would be the last resort, but would be considered if fines do not deter him. He called Trump's pattern of conduct a direct challenge to the rule of law. That's the specific judicial framing that most directly establishes where the legal track's escalation trajectory has arrived. 10 contempt findings with an accompanying judicial determination that the financial sanctions applied across the full documented pattern have failed and will continue to fail to deter the violating behavior is the most complete available documentation of an exhausted deterrent scenario in the criminal contempt context. It is the specific factual record that incarceration escalation analysis requires before a court can move to the most serious available sanction. Merchants' direct challenge to the rule of law characterization is not routine or minor noncompliance language. It is the specific judicial assessment that the conduct represents the most serious category of contempt, deliberate and repeated defiance of judicial authority that standard financial sanctions have failed to address. The last resort, but will be considered framing of the jail warning, is the judicial communication establishing that the court has exhausted its financial deterrence toolkit, formally characterized the conduct as a direct challenge to rule of law, and explicitly placed incarceration on the table as the next step. Now here's where the convergence becomes most significant. Any future case where Trump is convicted again, whether on new contempt findings in the hush money proceeding or on charges in any of the other investigations where his legal exposure remains live, will land on a defendant who is already a convicted felon with a 10-count contempt history and a judicial finding that his pattern of conduct constitutes a direct challenge to rule of law. That prior record is the sentencing context, distinguishing any future scenario from the unconditional discharge outcome. The unconditional discharge was calibrated to the extraordinary circumstances of sentencing a first-time convicted incoming president whose compliance with the legal process was treated as a mitigating factor. Those specific mitigating circumstances are no longer available to a repeat offender with the documented contempt history the McCann proceedings have created. The age and health profile dimension of any future incarceration decision is the specific additional complication making the convergence explosive. A judge evaluating whether to impose incarceration on a nearly 80-year-old convicted felon president with a documented cardiovascular risk profile. The medical disclosures describe faces the most extraordinary sentencing determination in American legal history. A determination whose outcome neither track can predict or fully communicate in isolation from what the other track is simultaneously establishing. The My Health is Perfect and Very Good genetics. Public claims are the health track version of the same credibility dynamic the legal track has been documenting. A person whose own doctors ordered advanced cardiovascular imaging, who takes higher aspirin doses than those same doctors recommend, who has documented chronic venous insufficiency and minimal sleep, and a bruising pattern consistent with anticoagulation effects of excessive aspirin use, cannot accurately characterize their health status as perfect in any clinical sense. The very good genetics attribution is the health track version of the attribution to political enemies. Explanation the legal track has been offering for documented court findings. Both convert documented concerning indicators into a narrative of vindication and unfair scrutiny that the documentation itself most directly undermines. Let me bring this home with the 4 points that matter most. The gap between the My Health is Perfect public claim and the specific documented medical indicators is the most direct illustration of the credibility dynamic operating identically in both tracks. In both contexts, the public claim is categorical and unqualified, while the documented record contains specific indicators that specialists and courts identify as directly inconsistent with the categorical claim. A person whose physicians ordered advanced cardiovascular imaging, who self-discloses taking higher aspirin doses than those physicians recommended, who has documented venous insufficiency and minimal sleep, cannot accurately characterize their health as perfect in any clinical sense. The unconditional discharge is the most consequential single legal outcome in the current baseline, not because it avoided incarceration in this case, but because it established the unprecedented status of convicted felons serving as president. Every future proceeding where a court evaluates whether to impose a sentence on a defendant who is already a convicted felon evaluates that question in the specific context of a defendant whose prior conviction is now part of the permanent record the sentencing judge will consider. The 10 contempt findings and the direct challenge to rule of law judicial characterization are the most legally significant dimension of the current escalation trajectory because they document the specific judicial exhaustion of every available deterrence mechanism below incarceration and establish the formal record making the jail as last resort, warning most credible as a genuine operational consideration rather than rhetorical escalation. A judge who has applied the standard financial sanction 10 times without producing compliance formally found that the standard sanction has failed, characterized the pattern as a direct challenge to rule of law, and explicitly placed incarceration on the table, has built the evidentiary and legal record, making the most serious contempt sanction most resistant to appellate reversal. The convergence of the documented cardiovascular risk profile and a standing felony conviction and 10-count contempt history at the intersection where any future serious sanction lands on a repeat offender whose age and health will make every judicial consequence decision more explosive than any prior accountability determination is the specific forward-looking accountability picture, making both tracks most significant when understood together. The health questions are documented in his own words to the Wall Street Journal. The felony conviction is on the permanent record of a completed New York proceeding. The contempt escalation is formally documented in 10 written findings and an explicit judicial warning. The intersection of all three in any future accountability scenario is no longer hypothetical constructed from political speculation, but a specific documented convergence built entirely on what Trump's own medical disclosures and the court's own written record have already established. The most dangerous moment for any president facing accountability is when the legal system's escalating consequences intersect with a documented health profile that makes every decision about those consequences more fraught. That moment is not coming. It is already here. The medical record is documented, the felony conviction is permanent, the contempt findings are entered, the jail warning is explicit, and the convergence of all four at the same time in the same person in the same presidency creates an accountability picture unlike anything American history has ever recorded. Stay tuned. The ongoing legal exposure and active investigations will continue adding to the felony baseline. The health indicators outside specialists are monitoring will continue being evaluated against the "my health is perfect" public claim in the context of a nearly 80-year-old president under the specific stress load that ongoing legal proceedings continuously generate and the specific future intersection of both tracks. The sentencing question in any future successful prosecution landing on a repeat offender president with Trump's documented health profile is the live high-stakes scenario, making the documented convergence of both tracks the most consequent,